The first step to writing twists is to figure out how hard to foreshadow it, how obvious or not obvious to make it. Personally, I say the golden rule when it comes to foreshadowing in general is that it should be the kind of thing that an average intelligence reader should not be able to see the foreshadowing hints and immediately know, oh, this is what's going to happen. Which often happens when you use very generic foreshadowing, stuff they've seen before. Oh, okay, now I know the whole rest of the plot of the book. But it should be clearly and logically connected to what happens in such a way that when the twist is revealed, then the reader can look back and be like, oh, this makes this and this and this thing that happened before makes sense. Or this makes sense because this and this and this thing happened before. Rather than just, if you need a 375 IQ to understand how the hint and the foreshadowing are attached, that's not good. Generally, a couple good ways to do this, to foreshadow twist, are to either have something be happening, but you don't know who. And then the reader can speculate, but it's not obvious. And then when it comes out who it is, who's behind all these random things happening, then you're like, oh, that makes sense because of who this person is. Or you know that you know who's doing something, but you don't know what they're doing. And then when it comes out what they're doing, oh, because of who this person is, this thing it makes sense that they'd be doing this particular thing. The second step is to make sure that if you have a character who is making the twist happen, which is usually the case, then to make sure that that the thing that they're doing that's creating the twist matches with their already established motivations. When explaining a twist, you can add in new elements, but you cannot add in new motivations. What I mean by that is, like, let's say there's a character who you already know their motivation is they love their little sister. That's all they care about. Their little sister, most important person in the world. But they also have loyalties to their adventuring party that they go and fight bad guys with. But one of the bad guys captures the little sister. Maybe we see the bad guy like obliquely threatening to kill her if the character doesn't do what they want, but we don't know that it's necessarily specifically that. Like, that specifically the bad guy has the little sister. So we're kind of confused. And then he is very reluctant to do so, but in a critical moment he ends up betraying his adventuring party in order to save his little sister. And then you find out that the bad guy has the little sister. So then it's a twist, then it comes as a surprise. That works pretty decently, especially if the fact that he has a sister is foreshadowed in the earlier interactions. Oh, he has a sister, then these earlier interactions make sense. But if the character has a little sister, but he's kind of about her, and then you explain later, actually he really, really loves his little sister, and you add in the motivation, you add in the reason, that just doesn't work very well. Because then you're just changing the entire character, basically, in the reader's mind from what they were before. And now, you can have twists that reveal new things about a character, that change the reader's and the other character's perception of the character, show things that were purposefully hidden before. But this only works if it is well foreshadowed in a way where the way they've acted up till then makes sense. The foreshadowing you've laid out then makes sense. The nice character, if you do it well, can actually turn out to be a traitor who just wants power, who wants to kill everyone so that they can rule the world, or whatever. But then you need to set up actions and thoughts and interactions that they think nobody's watching beforehand that then make that change make sense. I watched Den of Thieves, and at the end there's a twist The little miniature henchman, the getaway driver, was the boss all along. Wow! And my mom thought it was such a great twist. I hated it. There was no foreshadowing. There was nothing you could have looked at to make that make sense earlier that that character would end up being behind it all. It was just kind of shoved in there at the end. This is actually how it was. That was a twist. It was surprising. It was far from good. The third step is to ask yourself why specifically a twist fits better into your plot at certain points. Twists have more than just shock value. What's surprising for your reader should also be a surprise that shakes things up for your characters. So a twist shouldn't be something that, well, okay, our friends betrayed us, now let's go fight him. And then they just go fight and beat up their former friend. And now everything's good. And I mean, they lost their friend. But if the friend just goes to the bad guy and then basically becomes his henchman, you basically just added another henchman in the way between the characters and the villain. So it doesn't change how the characters need to go about what they do to get at the villain. It doesn't shorten the ticking time clock. It doesn't change the nature of the game in any way for the characters. But let's say they were relying on that character to get to where the villain is. Now the character has betrayed them. Maybe he's given the villain information that lets the villain go somewhere else. They don't even know where the villain's going to go. Now the whole nature of the game has changed. Now there's different things they have to contend with. And the different characters might interact differently, might react differently to this betrayal, which can show more about them and can lead to more conflict, lead to them coming together, whatever. But a twist should change the nature of the game for your characters. The surprising effect that it has on the reader is also useful for keeping the reader invested, keeping them hooked, keeping them turning the page. But the more important thing is the surprising effect that it has on the characters and how this forces them to adapt on the fly, what feelings this creates in the people in the book. Because they're just, we don't have our friend anymore. All right. And then it's just like, instead of 13 skeleton warriors between them and the evil lich, it's 14 skeleton warriors, essentially, if you catch my drift. Just more video game minions that are being thrown at them. Then that's not a good twist. It's just there so that the reader goes, what? OMG, much surprise. And then it doesn't really serve any other plot function. Another example of how a twist can serve a plot function is, twists generally come much later in a book, as I've seen, but you could have a twist earlier in the book, which is less of a twist for the reader, but more of a twist for the character. The character, maybe you begin the book, the character just found out that they were betrayed by somebody close to them. Huge twist for the character. The reader doesn't know this person. They weren't expecting necessarily that this person would not betray the main character. So it's not a twist for the reader. It's not shocking the reader. But the character is shocked, distraught. Their whole worldview has been shaken. They don't even know who this person is anymore. And that spurs them into action. They're trying to get their answers. So now, even though the reader isn't shocked, they're invested in the character because of the character's shock. A lot of twists come at the very end of a book or a movie, or at least very close to the end. And this is the kind of story where, it's going, the story's going, and then at the very end, some piece of information comes out, and you go, and then it's over. These are generally the kinds of stories that, when done well, stick in a person's mind, because right at the end, bam, and then it's just gone. And you're staring at the credits, and you're like, what the hell just happened? This is, in my personal opinion, the most satisfying and also most difficult way to do a twist properly. To do a story that has this kind of twist Generally, the entire story overall needs to be a different kind of story right from the beginning. It needs to essentially be based on there being unanswered questions, there being uncertainty for the characters and for the readers. For example, Inception is a movie pretty much completely based on uncertainty. You don't know what's a dream. You don't know what's real. So essentially the whole movie is about previously unanswered questions trying to be answered. Den of Thieves is also kind of like this. You're not sure exactly what's going on, who's orchestrating things. You know most of it. It's less like this exactly. I don't know if Den of Thieves is incredibly written, to be honest. But both movies, at least to an extent, rely on there being questions for the viewer, for the characters that aren't fully answered, and you're interested in what's going on because you want the answers to those questions. Den of Thieves gives you the answer to these questions by essentially, like, the way Den of Thieves works is you want to know, and then you find out in a way that gives you exactly what you wanted, but you didn't expect that to be the answer. So that's the twist. That's what leaves you staring at the credits. Personally, I don't think it's the best done twist overall, but that's how it rolls. Inception kind of lulls you into a false sense of security. You think it's actually real life. You think everything is going fine. You think actually that the questions are all answered in a certain way. Then you see the top's still spinning. I think I never watched Inception, but I've heard a lot about it. Top's still spinning at the end, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. But then you realize this is a dream too. The rug is pulled out from underneath you. The answer you thought you'd gotten is not the true answer. This is really a good method, a good rule for writing twists in general. Twists work well when you do something that raises questions for the reader. That's what foreshadowing well does. The reader has questions. What is this specific character doing? Or what's going on, who's doing this? But the reader can't figure it out themselves. And then it's answered in a way that's surprising but makes sense. Or you do that and you answer it in a way that's maybe not even surprising but makes sense. But then they find out that answer is wrong. And the answer is different. Now, doing this like Inception did, pulling the rug out from under a viewer, from under a reader, you gotta be good to do this right. Because if you do this and you don't do it well, you will piss everyone off. Because if everyone was happy with the original answer, if it wrapped things up nicely for them, and then you come out with a completely different answer, one that isn't foreshadowed, one that doesn't make as much sense, one that's not satisfying in the same way that the original answer was, almost everyone is going to hate you. It's rare that any story will be able to pull off "it was just a dream" without making people want to stab whoever wrote it. Inception managed to do so, but try it at your own risk. It's not easy to not make people angry. Generally, you will remove the satisfaction that came from the original answer. So you need to replace it with some other sort of satisfaction if you want your story to have some sort of satisfying ending. If I don't even know what example to give, like in Inception, I don't even know if I'd say I personally would find Inception's ending that satisfying. It was just a dream. I don't know if I personally would like that, but I think a lot of people did because it was clever, because there was that same theme that was used throughout the movie of things being dreams. So you can't be angry, really, that it shows up again. It's not coming out of nowhere. It's not completely unforeshadowed. But you weren't expecting it. You were hoping, it's just real. And then you're like, yay, it's just real. But then the theme comes up again in a way that you're like, oh, okay, it's not real. But that was slipped in a pretty clever way, especially since it's done in such a minimalist way. That adds to the satisfaction of the cleverness. Because they don't even say, this is just a dream. They don't even use words. Everything's happening, and then it just zooms in. There's a little small detail at the top. Not even that loud, just still spinning. So, the whole, this, they think people like how cleverly it's done, that this small detail from your own inference that you make from it as the reader then pulls the rug out from under you. Readers also like making inferences themselves, so it's all done in a very minimalist, clever way, which at least in part replaces the lost satisfaction of the clean, wrapped up, everything is real, go away, we're happy now. Now, when it comes to twists that reveal new motivations for characters, motivations that they were maybe hiding before, which, you also need to be good if you're going to pull this off and not piss people off. It's generally best to set it up by having them do things or say things that makes the reader go, wait, okay, I know their motivation is this, thinking of the false motivation that they give. They say my motivation is to help people, but really their motivation is world domination. So then they do certain things. They meet with dark people who we don't know fully what they're doing, but we know that they're up to something. And then the reader thinks, wait a minute. If their motivation was to help people and save sick puppies or whatever, why would they do this and this and this? So the question is already in the reader's mind of why. They're already expecting a why to be answered. So then when you give the why and you give this new motivation, it's not just you suddenly coming out of nowhere, rewriting their favorite character. Actually, this guy you like, he's a villain now. Sucks. Too bad for you. The reader is already not trusting that character. The reader already wants a why, and then the why can be twisty. The why can be answered in a very unique way that the reader is not expecting it. Like, the reader's not expecting that to be the reason, as much as they can be expecting anything in particular. And the last point is to remember that while a twist is generally set up by raising a question in your reader's mind, what's this character doing, or who's doing this thing, or why is this character doing these things, so that it doesn't just feel shoved in there out of nowhere. You can sort of shove it in if it's properly foreshadowed and then your reader's completely not expecting anything. This can be done well, but a lot harder. But you don't necessarily need to answer the twist at the time your character is expecting it to. You can answer it earlier. You can answer it later. There's generally, it's something like 60 to 80%-ish of the way through each book, I find, somewhere within there, that, like, most twists that I've seen fall. You can go before then. You can go after then. You can play around. This is what makes things truly unexpected. You could leave the question unanswered so long, until so late in the story that your reader's thinking, is this even supposed to be answered? Is this going to be an ambiguous ending? Am I really even going to get this answer? And then they get the answer. They may think or you can twist earlier. You could twist halfway through the book, that do something that completely changes the next half of the book. Generally speaking, twists that happen earlier in the book will be more of a twist for the characters than it is for the reader. In the beginning, when you open with a twist for the character, which cannot be a twist for the reader, because the reader didn't come in with any expectation for the character to be loyal. but it's a big twist for the character, which creates engagement. Or as you get further along the story, the characters gain more information and the readers become more invested. So it becomes less shocking for the characters, not by as much, but a little bit as time goes on, but more shocking for the reader the later you have the twist in the book. The characters might not even know about the twist if it comes later. It might be a twist that's just for the reader or for the viewer, as with Inception's twist. The characters don't notice the spinning top, just the viewer. So it's a twist solely for the viewer. So keep in mind that you can play around with when your twists happen. Keep in mind the effect that this has on who the twist mainly affects, characters or reader. And ask yourself who you want this twist to be for and why. It can affect both parties, but it might be more poignant. It might work well for your story, especially if you do it in a more minimalist way, to have it affect mainly just one. You can create a lot of dramatic irony with a twist that only the reader knows about and the character doesn't. And that can work for comedy, or that can work for cleverness. There's so many different reasons you could do so many different kinds of twists.